I just want to ask some questions today about what kinds of political stances are permissible today in Quakers in Britain today. Now, those of you who are familiar with British politics, you'll recognise some of the names along here. And I want to make the point, I suppose, that some of these characters and politicians are very much in line with what the bulk of Quakers, the loud voices anyway, in Quakers are saying, and some of them are not. And for individual Quakers, what does this mean? So let's talk about these different political stances first, and this is just kind of off the top of my head. Let's just see what comes out, and then I want to consider what the implications of that are. So if we start at the extremes, so clearly on this side here we have Nigel Farage and the architect of Brexit, which at the time, however many years ago that was it 10 years ago? I can't remember. Um, I remember thinking this was a great shock. I mean, I just wasn't aware of the likelihood that Brexit was going to be voted in, and it was. And since then, it's really changed my thinking in how I try to listen to different viewpoints. So here we have Nigel Farage again now coming for to the forefront of British politics, and he's now an MP, of course. And I'm pretty confident that anybody who wants to voice support for Farage in British Quakers, any kind of Quaker meeting, would be, I don't know, what would I say, would not be welcomed. There would be eyebrows raised. And it perhaps is quite an extreme position, is it? I'm not sure. But I think it's certainly compared to some of the others, a fairly extreme position. Then we've got Kemi Badenoch. Now, this is the Conservative leader at the moment and losing ground, obviously, to Nigel Farage's party. But the Conservatives, interestingly enough, were a dominant party, I think, of Quakers at some point. Certainly, all of the business people. There were clearly a lot of Conservatives within Quakers. And I don't think it's that way anymore, or at least they stay very quiet. If they are still around, they stay very quiet. And I'm curious about that. I mean, we talk about diversity. We think diversity is really important within Quakers, and you can actively see that Quakers want to attract more people who are people of colour. And Kemi Badenoch would suit that. And yet, I'm not convinced that we have very many vocal Conservatives who would be openly conservative in their viewpoints within a Quaker setting. And I'm fascinated by that. There was somebody, was it an MP called Body? Was it about 25 years ago? I think he died in the 90s from what I can see. Nowadays, we have no Conservative MPs, and it's almost unthinkable. I remember when I was in Leeds, there was a Conservative mayor at some point, and she said she couldn't bear to come to some of the meetings because of the fact that it was so left wing. And she went to one of the rural meetings, and I think that's a theme I might come back to actually, this kind of rural urban split. Now, in terms of Keir Starmer, of course, he's in power at the moment. And the Labour Party is in power. He's the Prime Minister. And again, even this very centrist, I mean, they're in power, so they voted in. So they've obviously got a massive support just a couple of years ago. And yet, is that uh, a permissible political position within Quakers at the moment? I'm not even sure it is. And if you're not in Britain, this might be of a surprise to you. So you do not see an articulation of Starmer politics within Quakers. In fact, you see loud um, criticisms of Starmer's policies. So that's the from the centre over to the right. I'm suggesting are not dominant. They're not permissible viewpoints, actually, out loud in Quakers. Now let's turn to this side. You might not even know this character if you're not from the UK. This is Ed Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, a very small party. But what I've come to realise, quite a dominant political persuasion, shall we say, within Quakers. And I'm not sure of the history of that. Somebody might know the history of that. Perhaps I think they were involved in the setting up of the party. But many, many key Quakers in key positions of influence remain in this party, in the Liberal Democrats. And it's been pointed out to me that if you look at what the policy positions of the Liberal Democrats are at any point, you will shortly afterwards see that Quakers follow suit. And that's really interesting to me because that's not the broad cultural perspective of us on the ground. We don't see a lot of our fellow Quakers being of this type politician. So I'm thinking is there something that we can say about centralized, uh, prominent, the power couples, the people who are very prominent in various meetings, very prominent on the central nominations processes to make sure that they're in key positions. Because after all, the Liberal Democrats were involved in the setting up of the Fabian Society, wolf in sheep's clothing, keep very much under the radar. It's fascinating, but I don't know much detail about it, but it's certainly interesting. But I certainly do think that this is what I would say culturally a permissible political attitude within Quakers in Britain today in 2025. And now let's come over to this figure. Again, you might not be aware of the new leader of the Green Party, Zach Polanski. Very, very charismatic, very noisy, got a lot to say for himself, and hitting those interviews and getting onto the newspapers' headlines, really very effective communicator. And clearly, this Green Party rhetoric is prominent across Quakers. Every event that I go to, there will be somebody speaking out for all of the same things that this kind of political statement is making, this kind of political party. Very, very prominent on green issues, but a particular way of thinking about green issues and other issues as well around, as I've said here on this channel before, around Palestine and around trends, etc. Very key issues that this kind of political statement is being prominent amongst Quakers. And I think what's interesting here is a couple of different things. One is extremism. Now, people would say that's extremism. And beyond that, I suppose, I'm not even in the political sphere, but prominent in the airwaves is like the Tommy Robinson end kind of thing. That's seen as extremism. But why isn't this seen as extremism? And clearly, beyond that is perhaps, the Roger Hallam of the world, the kind of the Just Stop Oil and the Extinction Rebellion type, very much supported, or at least loud and vocal and vociferous within Quakers, but not this. So I'm really struck by what counts as extremism. I'm not extremist myself. So I'm very alert to it. I'm very aware that we get some types of extremism that is permitted and others not. And then the second thing I think is this rural urban split. And I do see something like that happening. And I'd be very interested to have conversations with you, those of you who are in contact with me and emailing me or speaking with me. I'd be very interested to see what you think about this because I think there is an urban tendency to, obviously, it has more younger people in the urban centres, and these large meetings are perhaps having those kinds of viewpoints which are on this end of the social spectrum, the political spectrum. And then in the urban centre, now I don't think you're going to get much of this in the rural centres, the centres in the rural areas, the rural meetings. And I don't even know if you would get many conservatives, but there must be some, surely there must be some, but they don't talk about it out loud. So I'm left thinking that actually what you end up with is maybe this lot are perhaps where the rural meetings are, but we wouldn't know because they keep it very, very quiet. And certainly if you're not in the UK, this is where the polemic is, the rhetoric is within Quaker meetings. And it's very difficult to try to say anything out against that. Um, I'm not a fan. I don't agree with it. So, I've got I've got, I suppose, I'm laying my cards out a little bit there, and I don't like extremism, so I kind of it rubs up against me. So, how do I have to listen to this kind of stuff in Quaker contexts all the time? But it seems I do. So, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts and see what you think of that.